It began, as most tragedies do, with something small. A single sentence, spoken too softly to echo, yet sharp enough to cut through walls of steel and loyalty. It was a cold winter morning in Moscow, 1938. Snow clung to the Kremlin towers like ash. Inside, secretaries moved briskly through marble corridors, their footsteps muffled, their voices hushed. In one of those corridors, two mid-level officials whispered over their ledgers. A harmless exchange, they thought. "Have you heard? The General Secretary's aide has been meeting privately with the military command." Nonsense. He'd never. Still, someone saw him. Late at night. It was the kind of rumor that anywhere else in the world would dissolve by morning. But not in Stalin's Kremlin. Here, whispers were weapons. And every echo was a threat. By the time the story reached its third retelling, it had already changed. Now, the aide wasn't just meeting generals. He was conspiring with them. By the fifth retelling, he was plotting to replace Stalin himself. No one believed it entirely, but no one dared deny it either. And that was all it took. That afternoon, a clerk, nervous, eager to prove his loyalty, slipped a note onto the corner of a desk in Stalin's secretariat. It contained just 7 words. "Your aide has been seen with traitors." No signature, no proof, just ink and fear. By dusk, the note had reached Stalin's desk. He read it twice, expressionless. Then, without a word, he folded it neatly, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and poured himself a glass of vodka. The fire crackled in the corner of his office. Outside, Moscow froze. Inside, a single rumor had just begun to melt the foundations of trust. And one man's life was already over. His name was Nikolai Yezhov's deputy, though most called him simply the Aide. He was the kind of man Stalin liked to keep close, discreet, efficient, and terrified. He handled Stalin's schedules, read his reports, and knew the rhythm of his moods better than anyone. But over the last few days, the rhythm had changed. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Guards who once nodded to him now avoided his eyes. A single sheet of paper he'd left on Stalin's desk, an ordinary logistics report, came back later, marked with a red pencil slash across the margin. No signature, no comment, just the mark. That red line meant something. He just didn't know what yet. At dinner one evening, the aide found himself seated near the far end of the long table. Normally, Stalin would nod, gesture for him to sit closer, pour him a drink. But that night, Stalin never looked his way. Every clink of a fork echoed like a warning. Every glance felt like a question. And when Stalin laughed, that deep, slow laugh, the aide couldn't shake the feeling that he was laughing at him. Later that night, he stopped by his office, opened his drawer, and saw that something was missing. A personal notebook, one he'd kept since the early days of the revolution. No one had access to that drawer except him and Stalin's guards. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Because in Stalin's world, once a man started to wonder whether he was being watched, it was already too late. And somewhere, behind the closed doors of the Kremlin, Stalin was reading that missing notebook, each entry, each date, each private thought, and slowly deciding whether the man who had served him faithfully for years could still be trusted. By the end of the week, the Kremlin had gone eerily quiet. the kind of silence that meant something terrible was about to happen. Secretaries whispered less, typewriters clicked slower, and in the lower corridors, where the walls were thicker, men began disappearing one by one, summoned for questions, never to return. The aide felt it in the air, that static electricity of fear that crawled across the skin. He could feel eyes following him. Guards, clerks, even the janitor who swept the floors seemed to linger a moment too long when he passed. Then came the summons. A sealed envelope on his desk. No letterhead, no explanation, just a time and a place. Office 4, Lubyanka, midnight. He knew what that meant. Everyone did. At the Lubyanka, there were no midnight meetings, only interrogations. That night, snow was falling again as he entered the infamous gray building. A guard checked his name, nodded, and guided him down a narrow corridor lit by flickering bulbs. At the end of the hall stood a single door. Inside sat two men in plain uniforms, faces blank, voices flat. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They didn't need to. "Comrade," one began, tapping a file on the table. "We have reports of unusual meetings. Names have appeared. You were seen." "Seen where?" he asked. "You tell us," the man replied. Hours passed. Questions folded into accusations. Accusations folded into silence. The aide denied everything, but each word sounded weaker than the last. Finally, one of the men leaned forward and whispered, "It's not us you need to convince. It's him." And with that, the interrogation ended. He was escorted out, shaken, pale, his mind spinning. He knew exactly what him meant. That night, Stalin didn't sleep either. He sat in his office, reading the interrogation notes line by line, the faintest smirk on his face. The rumor had become real, not because it was true, but because he wanted it to be. And for Stalin, that was enough. 3 days passed before the summons came again. This time, not from the Lubyanka, but from the Kremlin itself. The aide was told Stalin wanted to speak privately. He felt a hollow dread rise in his chest as he climbed the stairs to Stalin's office. The guards at the door said nothing. They simply opened it. Inside, the room glowed in firelight. Bookshelves cast long shadows. A phonograph hummed faintly in the corner, playing a slow, mournful tune. Stalin stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the snow falling over Red Square. "Come in, comrade," he said softly, without turning. "You've been busy, I hear." The aide froze. "Busy, Comrade General Secretary?" "Meeting people, talking, thinking, perhaps too much." Stalin turned, his eyes calm but cold. There was no anger in his tone, only quiet amusement. That was always worse. "You've served me well. You've sat in this room for years. You know my habits, my moods, my secrets." He smiled faintly. "And yet, lately, I wonder if you know your place." The aide's voice trembled. "Comrade Stalin, I've never—" "Never what?" Stalin interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Never questioned me? Never whispered? Never thought you might do my job better than I? He moved closer, so close the aide could smell the tobacco on his breath. You think I don't hear what's said in my own house? You think walls don't have ears? The aide shook his head, panic seizing him. It's lies, I swear. Lies, Stalin repeated quietly, turning away. Yes, lies are useful. They tell me who panics first. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small black notebook. The aide's notebook. You write well, Stalin said. Very honest thoughts. Especially about me. The aide's breath caught. He remembered every word he'd written, his doubts, his frustrations, even the nights he feared Stalin's temper. It was over. Stalin flipped the notebook shut and set it down gently. I trusted you once, he said, but I trust no one twice. He turned toward the door. Guards. The aide fell to his knees, words tumbling out. Pleas, apologies, promises. But the guards didn't listen. They lifted him by the arms, dragging him out into the corridor. As the doors closed behind him, Stalin picked up his glass of vodka and whispered to himself, Rumors die easily, but fear lives forever. He drank slowly, savoring the burn. The aide was never seen again. No announcement, no trial, no record. His name was erased from the ledgers, his photograph removed from official albums. It was as if he had never existed. But inside the Kremlin, everyone remembered. The whispers stopped completely. Not because the truth had been found, but because no one dared speak it anymore. A new man took the aide's place, careful, quiet, always smiling. He spoke only when spoken to. He never looked Stalin directly in the eyes for more than a second. And when he wrote notes, he burned every scrap afterward. One evening, during another late-night meeting, an officer accidentally mentioned the former aide's name. The room froze. Stalin didn't look up. He simply stirred his tea and said, almost absent-mindedly, Names of the dead are best left dead. No one ever spoke that name again. But Stalin hadn't forgotten. He kept the little black notebook locked away in his desk, revisiting it on sleepless nights. Not out of guilt, but fascination. The words inside weren't treasonous. They were ordinary. But they had reminded him of something he could never afford to feel. Doubt. And to Stalin, doubt was poison. So he did what he always did with poison. He purged it. As years passed, the story of the vanished aide became a whisper itself, told behind closed doors, always in fragments, never with names. Some said the aide confessed. Others said he refused. No one really knew, but they all understood the lesson. In Stalin's world, truth didn't matter. Rumors were reality. Silence was survival. And loyalty meant nothing, unless it came with fear. That was how Stalin ruled, not by words or armies, but by the pause before a man spoke, and the terror of what might follow after.